Can you? I know it's a little bit awkward, but can you please all stand up? That's my first slide normally. Wait. Yeah, perfect. Then put your arms in the air. After lunch exercise, perfect. Then spread your arms to indicate your age. I know that's subjective, but if you're older, then it's wider. If you're younger or you feel younger, then yeah. Then almost done. Subtract or add your Umbraco knowledge. So if you have a lot of knowledge, add or subtract if you don't feel and you can learn. And if you, last one, if you can, if your age is divisible by 3, close your hands. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. Now I have a picture. You can all sit down because the last slide was stand still. I have a picture to prove how awesome my session was. Thank you all for that. So I'm Damiaan. I work with Umbraco since version 4, 2009 approximately. I'm a Belgium Umbraco user group organizer. I'm a documentation curator, as in if you do a PR for documentation, I am the one who says like, "You're awesome, do another one." And I became an MVP last year. I'm a magician in my free time, so the previous one was a trick to get people warmed up. And I'm from Belgium. If there is something, tweet me at dampbe. It's Damiaan Peeters with BE. And you can always mail me if you have questions. Antwerp in Belgium is not too difficult. It's a small yellow dot on the map. Awesome, right? And I'm not alone. I have a team of awesome people. Sven, you probably all know from the forum or not, but he's an awesome guy. Elgertje and Joran too. So what's on the agenda for today? We are going to first tell a little story, and then we are going into different scenarios, and I'll end. Well, that's most of the part of my talk with a lot of code. So if you're not, so I can't say the word. I learned in the previous session, technical. Then you can run away after the different scenarios. I won't blame. So first story. I'm a magician, and I do have like 3 rings, 3 metal rings, pretty hard rings. Normally I bring 5, but I need to travel, so that's an issue. to keep it with to get through customs. That's it. Have you heavy metal in your bag, sir? Yes, I do. So imagine this is software and this is software. 2 software modules. How do they blend together? It's just like that, easy peasy, right? Every developer knows, like, if you want to integrate software, it sometimes breaks. Need to put off my watch. Bad for the watch. So, if you have a software and you need to integrate 2 modules, what do? It's easy peasy. You integrate 2 software modules. Well, that's what you tell the project manager. Because what happens in real life is that one thing always flies apart and never does the thing which you want to do anyway. And you end up with 1 piece of software anyway, or 1 software module. If you want to integrate like 2 pieces of software at once, that's mostly impossible. And then if you want to do something else, like having 3 pieces of software linked together, it's most of the time, wait a second. Can you hold the middle one? Yeah, that's it. So thanks a lot. Small story. Thanks. Why I do that is to just, if you have external data, you have a CMS, that's two different things, right? But every customer which comes to you and asks for a website, well, most of the time there is something somewhere, like a CMS, an ERP, a line of business application, which you need to integrate into your website. If you need to do that, then you need to think up front, like, how am I going to do that? So there are two scenarios to do that. So, little story. You can import the data into your Umbraco, or you can connect to the data externally. So that's only two possibilities, but you need to choose. So if you import data, what I mean with importing data is you have some data going into your Umbraco, and that turns up as an Umbraco content node or some media item. So if we talk about importing, that's the scenario. Most of the time it ends up like this, like nodes. That's something we all know, or some of us maybe not, but that's Umbraco, that's the backend. Then if you want to connect to some external data, that means that you have your Umbraco instance, which is going and reaching out to external data. Something, somewhere, might be anything. That can look like this. You have chocolate. We're from Belgium, so I need to show you chocolate. I don't broth chocolate, I show chocolate, I know. This data comes from a database. It's hosted somewhere else. It's hosted by the client. It's hosted by an external party. You don't own the data, but you need to show the data. That's external content. In this case, it's an integration in the website. External data can come from any place, anywhere, anytime. It can be NoSQL, it can be external databases, it can be the same database with different tables. You have plenty of options. It doesn't need to stop there, of course. So now that we know what internal and external is, let's look at the advantages and disadvantages. So first, start with the advantages of the import. If you import data, it's pretty easy to render out. It's easy for the front-end developers because it's just Umbraco data being shown. It's pretty fast. Umbraco is known for being fast. If it's not fast, you might be doing something wrong. And this is, by the way, still a V7 code. I know I have an answer to that at the end of the presentation. So if you're interested in V8, please be seated. It's only 45 minutes left. So the good things about external data, well, you can use real-time data. You can have petabytes of data reaching out and showing it to the user. If you have petabytes of data, it might not be a good thing to import. A good thing. So, what did I say? It's imports are not so suited for big amounts of data. If you have regular updates, you know it's slow. So don't import data if you have one of these issues or think about importing data. This is really important to know. If you want to take 3 things away from this session, the slow import is probably one of the most important things you need to know. The content service is slow. Always think of that. I can't repeat it enough. I can say it in another way, but this is one of the most important things. If you import data, it's probably slowing down your site, slowing down everything, slowing down something, but it's slow. Somehow, you're going to have issues with that. On the other hand, external data has caveats too. So if we look at them, that's mostly architectural and from development perspective, you have a lot of work to do. You have more development time to reach for external data. You need to take into account what if the data isn't available? What if it's down? What if the format is changing? What are you showing to the user? You need to have a lot of fallbacks you need to have a lot of fallbacks in place just in case the other API isn't working or isn't reachable or whatever. So that's summarized. So the import is pretty easy, can be fast to render, but the update is slow. External sources give you a lot of flexibility, but it comes with the necessary complexity where you need to think upfront about how to work with this data. So I made a demo, which I'm going to try to show. And I say try because, nice. The screen is working. Perfect. The technical stuff here is really awesome. So this is a sample site, V7 sample site, nothing too fancy. It has some products, which I've already deleted some of. I do have the people, which are showing the 4 people. You see my design skills are really awesome. I didn't even bother on adding pictures. Perfect. About us, no, that's mainly it. So why am I showing this? That's because I need to show you the backend too. And the backend says this is a product, and the products have child items, in this case 7. And we have people, and the people, are other people. So let me explain. The products are imported from somewhere else. So I do have some, perfect. I do have some very fancy proof of concept where I download a picture and from Flickr. Let's hope it's, I don't know if I set on the safety filter. Well, I have a product name, some product name. I do have some description, Flickr description, which is empty, and I do have a photo. And I promise this is live, otherwise I would have been telling you that this wasn't live. I can show it again. Wait, let me show it again. Import. You see, this is another photo, I hope. And perfect, we have now an extra photo. Yes! So that's an import. With another photo, perfect. The people, on the other hand, this is the normal setup from the starter kit. We're not using the starter kit to display the people. We're reaching out to some external source, and we're not managing it. We do, however, use an external package. We use the fluidity package because it's V7. We can still use the fluidity package from Matt, and we can edit and update all the data. If you have never looked into the fluidity package, it's really awesome. This is no work to set up. It's like 10 lines of, it's copy-paste because that's just the normal getting started fluidity setup. But I do have a database, and I do have CRUD, read, update, search, all the things. And that's inside a custom tree with custom sections and all the things. And it's 10 lines of C# code. If you don't know it, look into it. It's awesome. It's free. So that's a very, very brief demo of the starter kit with an import and external data. Let's see how we can build all these things. So, to start off with the import, an import can be triggered by different means. So first, a user does something. It's scheduled on a regular basis, for example, or ad hoc sometime, somewhere where a process is triggering something, or there's an external process which calls in and says like, hey, you need to update something. And that's called a webhook, which is an awesome mechanism if you use it. So the first one, a publish event, would be a user-triggered action. The second one, Quartz, Hangfire, if you're using it, or the Umbraco scheduled tasks, are scheduled items. That can be one time in the future, not in the past, because then you live in the past and the computer works now and not in... There's someone like, how do you mean? Oh, sorry. And webhooks, then you need to, of course, just have an API somewhere where they can reach to you. We were using the first one. That was a dashboard, which was the awesome design made by me with an import button. That's all. For V7, that's a simple config file. It's a few lines of code. If you use V8, this won't work anymore. That's code you need to write now, which is awesome too, but it's different. Then what I did to create the import button was I created a plugin. I will share my slides, so I have the documentation link every time, so you can follow it yourself. Documentation of 7 is still available while it's being updated to 8, but there's a link like 7, click on the 7, and then you go to the 7 documentation instead of the 8 version. It still works. So what you saw was the index file, index.html. I don't even have bothered creating a lot of Angular code. And then what it did, it opened a new page and I implemented the Umbraco authorized controller. And I did some posting to Flickr to retrieve it. Then I did a lot of code, which is too small to read, but it doesn't matter because it's just using the services. If you don't know the services are made to create content nodes, to update content nodes, to create media items, to update media items. All these things can be done from code, and that's some badly written, complex code to retrieve a Flickr image, to create a node, a content node, to download the photo from Flickr, to put it back in the media, and to link the media item to the content node. Well, anyway, I'll share my code. It's on GitHub also, by the way. So that gave us here the perfect name and a product name, which was the name of the Flickr photo. But that's not always what you want, because the name here might not be what you want in the URL, for example. It's pretty easy to change, and I always think, like, why are people not doing this more often? Because it's really easy to update the name and not have the big number in the URL. So imagine we have a name like this, where the number matches, I've even lines drawn up front, and the product name matches the rest of the URL. This link in the info is generated automatically. And how do you do that? That's by using a URL segment provider. So if you import data, consider looking at the URL segment provider, because that's one of the most easy to use and powerful features of Umbraco, or of changing the Umbraco route. It seems a lot of code, but to be honest, it's only these 2 lines of code which really matter. What do? You get from the current content node the value of a property, in this case the product name. There's even a toURL segment extension method which you call, and which strips down and cleans up the string, and then it is turned into a URL. And this is the segment which was retrieved upon the big number you saw earlier, and this is a product name which is attached. This URL segment provider, a segment, by the way, is in a URL everything between 2 slashes. So if you have products/something/something else, the first something is a segment. So now we have for this segment a specific thing which is stored in the database, a specific name which is stored in the database. It's pretty easy to look up. If you change your code here, know that it's stored in the database, and it won't be changing until you hit save and publish again. Know that the URL tracking doesn't take the change into consideration. So think about that if you implement a 301 strategy. If you have a URL segment provider, then Umbraco needs to know that it exists. In V7, that's the application starting event, where you say like the resolver.current.insert type. If you're using 8, I didn't put it in the slides. It's using the component, the URL resolver injection, and I'll come back to that later. So that was import. Are there already any questions, remarks? Too loud? Too lazy? Too slow? Too much eaten? Yes? All of? Yeah. Everything's fine. So external data. To reach out from external data, that's a lot more challenging. So what did I do? I already told you guys. I used the getting started from Fluidity, where they say like create a person table, create a person database, then create a repository. This is bad repository, it's too small. Perfect, keep it like that. It's not to be used, but it reaches out and grabs a POCO from the database. And like I told you, it's using the Fluidity package, which gives you all the CRUD possibilities in the backend. If you are not supporting these guys from Umco, by the way, nested content, what is it, string, too many packages which you probably use or all use or most of you use, these guys are creating them for free. Do look at them and do support them on Patreon, even if it's only $1 a month. They have done awesome work in the past, and they continue to do that, so please support them. We discussed that. So there are 2 main ways to render external content. It's a service controller or a render MVC controller. By the way, if you want to have 3 things from the session, the first one was imports are slow. Consider that always. The second one is the URL segment provider. Don't forget it. It's really easy to import to use it. Don't forget the URL segment provider. URL segment provider. So service controllers, known and used by a lot of you, I'm pretty sure. If you look at the documentation, it says like, can be used for rendering MVC child actions. That's not something special about Umbraco, it's MVC child actions, and that seems like, in my eyes, a perfect match to get some data somewhere and show it to the user. As you noticed, and I haven't shown in the demo, but at the bottom in the footer was a random person being shown. How can we do that? I create a controller. It's a random fetch from the database. In this case, like the bad way, don't ever do that in production code. Like fetch everything from the database, random order, and then first it's anyway. You need to give bad examples and show how you don't need to do it before people understand how you don't need to do it. Because otherwise, I'm showing code how to do it, and you think like I can do it otherwise. Don't do it this way. So what you then do, you create in the views a random person folder and an index file, and as by magic, everything links together because a random person controller matches the random person folder, and the index matches the index, the name of the index view here. If you do that, then the only thing which you need to do is have the right model. Okay, I used the DB model. That might not be the best way. You might want a view model, but anyway, I used the DB model on top, put some nasty HTML code in it, and it's showing a random person, and it's completely separated from every other code. And that's how you use a surface controller. To instantiate this controller, in the view, you use html.action. html.action is calling a subcontroller where you say like, the controller name matches this one, and the index is the method which is called. And then a partial view is returned. And you can, with a surface controller, manipulate the data being passed to partial view. You don't need to do everything in your view, having methods on the view manipulating data. A partial view has also a controller. So take that into account. If you work with partial views, you can create a controller for that too. It's called a surface controller. So that's the first thing. And then the second way of importing or of using external data, well, there is a third way, by the way. If you want to leave, there is a third way which might be very interesting. So the second approach, that's if you go to the documentation, you need to search for custom controllers or hijacking Umbraco routes. And I call it render MVC controller. I don't know about you guys, but my head never wrapped around it. What is hijacking Umbraco routes? I leave it in there. I could remove it, but I don't get it. So after the session, come to me, talk to me, and explain it, because I don't get it. Anyway, you should know that every page which is rendered out is being passed through a default controller. And that controller is the render MVC controller. So imagine that we do have a controller and that we can extend or plug into Umbraco into the routing, and that we can say like, let's change this. And that exists. That's default standard Umbraco. So imagine we create a person controller which inherits from the render MVC controller. Then the person is, what do you think? The document type. So imagine that you have a person controller. That means that we now have the possibility to render every node which is inherited from the document type person, that we can manipulate this data. Further on, we add a method. This is standard MVC. And method is called details. We create a view model, and the view model is passed back to the by the method. The details here is your template. So you are, in this case, we are working for a node, any node from the person document type, and a details template. By the way, if you use index here as the method name, then you are referring to the template which is defined by the Umbraco backend. So you can even change there and the behavior of which data you are manipulating based on the template, based on the document type. Second, don't forget to, oh yeah, good one. That's a very good tip. Thanks, myself, then my previous self. Details in this case needs to exist as a template. If it doesn't exist as a template, you won't be triggering this method. So that means that it doesn't scale. If you have details as the name of a template, that might be a bad idea because that works for persons, but if we start with products later on, then we have a second details and that will be the same template. So it doesn't scale very, very well. Think upfront on how to name your templates. Oh, render MVC controller is probably the third thing. If you want to have three things to run away from this session, and to take back from this session, it's that the imports are slow, content service is slow, take that into account. Always consider someone? The URL segment provider, yes, thank you. And the third one is learn how to use the render MVC controller. If you can use the render MVC controller, you're an Umbraco, you're more than an Umbraco master. You can probably go to the complete course and teach the teachers something about Umbraco. Well, not really, but almost, right, Ismail?
Yeah.
Yeah, you see. So we have now a controller and an action. We talked about a view model. The view model here is inherited from the render model. If you inherit from a render model, you have some, in V7, two constructors, in V8, one constructor, which you need to implement. It's .NET control dot, and he types everything out. You don't need to do that yourself. And what I did here was adding a new property. I'm going to fill that property into my details somewhere by repository, which we already saw, which you shouldn't be copying because that's bad code. And then we pass in here the person to the view. That means that we have in the view first at the top our model, and that we can still, and imagine this, that we can still have Umbraco.model.content with all the Umbraco power which is available, still available, but at the same time we have a model.person property in this case, which contains our external data. And I think this is a pretty neat and pretty easy way to do external data and to fetch external data on your template. You do still have an issue with routing, but we'll come back to that. If you are searching on the documentation for the hijacking routes, you can search. You can use the search field, or you can use Google. Or if you go to the documentation, then you go to reference, you go to routing, then you need to scroll down. And I cheated. I cut a few things out before I took the screenshot. Then you need to be at the bottom at custom controls. I know this can be better. We're working on it. If you have some ideas about documentation and improving documentation, that is more than time welcome. Please come and talk to me. So that's the complete URL. So like I said, we do have now some data on the document type, but we don't know which person to show, because we don't have the name yet. I should have shown in the demo. We have a just simple query parameter being passed in, and using the query parameter, we could change that. I should have. Sorry, going back. This, by the way, here is a parameter which is passed into the action. And this is going to make sure that it's passed. It's standard MVC, so it's a query string parameter in this case, which is being passed and which can be used. So if you have this parameter, you can do that yourself. There are a lot of ways to handle routing. As you saw, in this case, we have the people node, and we changed the people node. It's like it hosted our database records, and then I played with some query string. There are 3 ways to handle Umbraco routes. So first, there's a content finder. No, only 2 ways, but I have 3 points. So you have the content finder to handle and match the right node, and you have the virtual node route handler, which is an awesome name. The content finders are known by a lot of people. If you don't know them, it's a way to find the right URL, to find the right node if you have a URL. Look at the documentation, read it. If you don't know it, it's easy enough explained to understand. And if you don't understand it, reach out on the forum. There are a few awesome people who are really willing to explain it again and again and again. Because the content finders are used most of the time, I thought like, hey, let's go crazy and use an Umbraco node, virtual node route handler. What does that thing do? Well, imagine you have the MVC routes. That's this one. There is an extension method, which is map Umbraco route. The rest is all the same as plain MVC. There is some one parameter which is extra, and that's a virtual node route handler. And what does that thing do? Well, that's a way to tell Umbraco, like, if you map an MVC route, then you should match this node as the parent node for that route. By the way, we do pass in the slug here as a, well, probably not the best way. And then this is being passed, and it says like, oh, I'm going to find the people node. Don't ever do that, like get everything with that bad way of searching, but seems to work. So what we do is with the Umbraco node handler, it's going to be kicked in if you have a match on this MVC route, and it says like, return this people I published content node back to Umbraco to be able to continue. So what we have been doing up till now is we have an Umbraco, an MVC route, which is then passed in to the controller, which is then using a view model, which is then passed on to the view. So you saw everything which should have been... Someone? No? This is the complete pipeline of having a custom route till something for the user. If it's too quick, I'll share the slides. You can ask me afterwards if you don't want to think now, like, how is it working? But that means that we are using an Umbraco, all the Umbraco things to render external data and still have all the Umbraco power available at all time, using during the controller, during the view, and even when mapping MVC routes. That brings me to the last bonus approach. I don't have code. I don't have an example. But it's so awesome. I learned about it only 10 days ago at our last meetup. So bear with me. Try to be very focused because it's very, very interesting. So imagine you have your Umbraco instance, your document type, the people's document type, and you think like, I want to show this and this and this pieces of data from an external source. What you do is you add the properties as if it was normal entered by the user, by the content editor. and you add the Umbraco properties. That's the easy part. Then you go and implement the editor models event manager dot sending content model event, and you hide the tab with all these properties from the user. So first you add properties, but you say to the backend content editor, you can't change them. At that time, so what do you do? He's not the only one. At that time, what you do is you go fetch the data which you need during the PCR prepared event, the published content request .prepared event, and you inject the data from your database, from your API, whatever, into the published content, which is then prepared. It's the model prepared. And you do that using, for example, a query string, some routing, anything you like, and you insert that into the thing itself at the moment where you need it. So that means that content editors don't see it, but that means at the same time that front-end editors know that these properties exist on that page. First time I heard that was like, I don't know how about you guys, but it's an awesome thing.
I'm getting that now.
No? What? So what is the good thing? Front-end editors can already start working because the properties exist. You can store even Umbraco content in an external data source. So you can, for example, because you have this as a nested content object, for example, you store the JSON as a blob somewhere. If you want to edit it, you can use Fluidity with a nested content package to edit the content. It's stored as a JSON blob in your database. But if it's millions of items, that doesn't matter because it's a database, it's outside of the Umbraco content. The disadvantage you have more code to write, and it might be not the best case if it's not documented, because some properties are filled somewhere, somehow, and you don't know why if it's not documented properly. So, shout out to Dave who explained it. Shout out to him because this is really, really awesome.
One question. Does this approach also trigger the examine indexes?
No, but it does implement, well, you should implement iPublish content. So, for example, if you have some catalog with a subcatalog and some product, then your front-end editor can use your standard libraries to build up the breadcrumb. You don't need to think about that. If you're using with the external data, somehow you always end up like, okay, but with this ID I need to, and your breadcrumb code explodes like hell, because in that part of the site, in that part of the site, and then you come up with some abstract way of and some implementations of this abstract way to build a breadcrumb. And this approach doesn't need that because everything is converted into an iPublish content, and you can do like product.parent. And what is the parent? Oh, that's another. So he implemented at that time a lot of things as an iPublished content. Awesome ID. And it, to be honest, it combines a part of the import with a part of the external data. If you want three things to run away from this session, is that the import is slow, URL segment providers, and the render MVC thing, and this one. So a few tips if you work with, well, to summarize, learn routing and controllers, learn the render MVC controller, learn how to use URL providers and content finders, learn how to use the URL segment provider, learn how to use the service controller. It's all in documentation. If you don't understand documentation, ping me. we can work together towards some better future. Know that the import will... sorry, you want a photo? You got it? Okay, cool. Know that the import will go wrong. Any import will go wrong. Certainly if you have a second point, multiple endpoints triggering the website and sending thousands of update requests at the same time to your website. Things like that, if you use webhooks, for example, is awesome to take your site down. Certainly with the content service being so slow. Oh, and if you ever think about using the relationship API, a kitten dies for every relationship you make. It's probably the worst API in Umbraco. It's not fail-safe, it's not thread-safe, it's not... you can make duplicate relationships, and not one way and another way, but like having duplicates, because there's no unique index on table, on the database table, so you can insert duplicates in the database table. Maybe it changed in the last version, but last time I checked, it is not. It's it's not meant to be used. If you have performance issues, you haven't worked a lot with Examine, go to the Umbraco course, because that's pretty powerful information you get during a day. If you are not planning on investing a lot in Examine, do go to the package repository in the Examine DB, converts your database table into an Examine index. That's all it does. Perfect, and it updates automatically. You don't need to do anything yourself. And don't ever try to write your own caching layer. I've been taking over a few websites in the last couple of months, which all had their own caching layer. It will slow down your site. It will slow up startup. It's not thread safe. It's not. There's no locking. There's no load balancing thoughts brought in. You can't write it yourself. It's been written for you. It's in the Umbraco install. It's available. Use it, please. You and your future you will be very happy with it. Oh, and note that caching is not a solution. It's a fix. Because an old man with a stick, it's like, see, it's like, An old man with a stick is still an old man. A website who's running slow is still a website running slow, and you can cache and you can donut cache and you can cache, but maybe you should take a step back and see what's going wrong. Because if you do that, Umbraco is fast, and even with thousands of pages, it's still fast. And if it's not fast, you're probably doing something wrong, and caching is not the answer. It's still an old man without a stick, or with a stick if you implement caching. So if you are looking on the internet, UI-O-Matic and Fluidity are two packages for V7. Fluidity is not yet available for V8 and won't be in the upcoming time. CMS import is a commercial package, but it's pretty easy to import data into your website, can be extended in multiple ways. And if you are looking for the code, everything is on my GitHub. You can download it, you can look at all the code. And I did a PR for V8, and it almost works. Including all the dependency injection. So if you think like, how should I do inject a property, a repository into my Umbraco virtual nodes root handler, I've been looking into it. It's been done. Don't do it. Or don't try to find it yourself. It took me half an hour. Too easy if you know how to do it. And with that, I would like to thank you, because this was my presentation.